Welcome to the Navigating Solo podcast, a dedicated platform where we explore the unique needs and concerns of solo aging with a focus on empowerment, connection, and proactive planning. I'm your host, Ailene Gerhardt, and today I am excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Jackson Rayner. Dr. Rayner is a board-certified clinical psychologist who's been practicing psychotherapy with adults and couples for more than 30 years. He brings the experience of decades to his work as a counselor, educator, and consultant. As an emeritus professor in the University System of Georgia, Jack is retired from service as a dean and director of clinical training services for graduate programs at universities in Georgia and North Carolina. In addition to his psychotherapy practice, he is a writer, having published 4 well-received academic textbooks related to grief and bereavement, crisis intervention, and rural mental health. He currently is a freelance writer and is widely published in a variety of print and online magazines, including NPR and PBS affiliates. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
I look forward to our conversation. From your experience, and that can be personal, professional, a blend of both, what are some specific challenges that you find men have regarding solo aging?
Let me tell you how my interest in solo aging began. I was a very well-married man for 38 years. I had a powerful relationship with a very strong woman. She died in 2016, and I moved from being a couple, Jack and Karen, to being Jack. I was given all sorts of invitations to be in other relationships, to do the things that most folks wanted me to do, and I found it to be very dissatisfying. And so I have found then that solo aging has been more agreeable to me as I began to adopt more of the sense of what it's like to be autonomous, independent, and still need to have companionship, collegiality. My interest and my antenna began to raise, and I have developed more of a sense of curiosity, patterns, styles of solo aging. I have found that men have more difficulty in some ways than women do in terms of forming collegial and collaborative networks, and have also found that men and women typically are not doing well with this whole solo aging concept.
That is true. The hope is that as it increases in visibility and more resources are developed and more good professionals are out there just like you who are increasing visibility, sharing their expertise and knowledge, that people will be able to learn from and with each other to be able to craft more solid planning. Was there anything about the dive into solo aging that surprised you?
Oh, there was so much that surprised me. I will tell people now in 2024, after my wife's death in 2016, that I have made any number of hard right turns, is how I describe the evolution of how I now find myself. I will be 70 next month. And so over the course of my aging, there are substantive differences with the way that I live my life. They are ultimately good. What has been surprising to me is how I have been able to learn how to tolerate being alone, to make the distinction between being lonely and being isolated and cold and irritable. I have found clinically that more folks that I work with find that they are less able to tolerate the sense of loneliness without being able to soothe themselves, to comfort themselves, to find some way that they can make sense out of being solo.
You mentioned the speed bumps that come with making connections, especially it's prevalent for everyone, but you mentioned that as part of possible challenges for men. Could you say more about that?
I can. Men, me included, are notorious for wanting to be passive and wanting to be solicited by others for connection and for some sense of being sought after. There is nothing that is any more troubling than to sit back and wait and for men to say, they didn't invite me. They should know anybody else would invite me. Oh, son, we need to talk. If you want to be in connection with folks, you have to go out and seek connections. You have to pick up the phone, call, say, hello, I'm lonely, or some variation on a theme. Could we go to dinner? Could we go to a movie? I would like to be invited to fill in the blank. And men, so many men say, I can't do that. Then my answer is, then you'll be alone. And you're going to be much more isolated than you say that you want to be. So that is, in many ways, a therapy concern, is how to help and encourage men to seek connection with others when I'm not sure that I still ponder, how is it that us guys were taught that it was the world's job to invite us to come out and play? And so there is a good deal of learning, experimentation, and exploration that is involved in stepping outside of ourselves
Mhm.
and beginning to seek others who are willing to allow us our vulnerability. I do think that there's a piece of that most of us men were taught that we should be tough, hail fellow met, and that we should not have to in any way touch the vulnerability that loneliness takes us to, and suggests that we need to be related to others.
Mm. I think stepping outside of one's comfort zone is a historically human speed bump, right?
I do too.
I'm sure you find that professionally and obviously as we navigate the world just as human beings. I think that piece of vulnerability of stepping outside one's comfort zone. When I give talks on solo aging and building one's network, people say, okay, that's the information, but what's the how? How do I do that? I'm not comfortable asking for help. I'm not comfortable asking to be invited. People should know. And
Yeah.
so it's about flipping that a little bit and taking that risk. And what's the worst that can happen?
The
What's
worst that can happen is someone will say, sorry, I'm busy Thursday night. How about Saturday afternoon?
Right. I think that vulnerability piece is a barrier for so many people. And it sounds like it comes up consistently in your interactions with men and navigating solo aging.
It comes up consistently. What is under that, and I do think that it's worth saying a bit more clearly, is that there is an issue of vulnerability. When an individual, in this case, we're talking about men, when a man has been related in an intimate primary relationship for years, to be without that is in many ways like being undressed, and to be that exposed, that psychologically naked, is very threatening. So if I can help a man to get it down to, I'm not comfortable doing that, rather than danger, Will Robinson, then that's progress. It does take a great deal of practice, particularly for folks who are a bit more on the shy side, or who are a little bit less capable with running their big mouth like some of us, like me, are. That does take some exploration, and it takes the examination of how you can enter into groups of people and how much you can tolerate being on the periphery of the group until you can learn ways to move in and create more of a center for yourself.
I think that the component of relationships, connections take time to nurture and to build. One barrier for solo agers, as you well know, is people are looking to designate different roles for people as part of a support system and building
Oh,
that
yeah.
support system. And we can't immediately ask for help until we've nurtured a relationship or tried. I think that that can definitely be seen across the board. And certainly it sounds in your work, in your own experience. Were you, as part of that shift where you shared your own experience a number of years ago in making that shift, those hard right turns, as you put it, did you find that you were stepping, even with your clinical training and all of that, stepping outside of your comfort zones and
Oh my
your
gosh.
and exposing yourself in a way vulnerable for seeking assistance and support in the way that you chose? Because when you shared how you even started exploring solo aging, it was how other people thought I should navigate this. And I had to, you didn't say it this way, but advocate for yourself for what you wanted and learn what you wanted along the way. Did that involve some stepping out of comfort zones, et cetera?
Oh, of course, it involved stepping out of a great deal of comfort zone, because I did not know how to advocate for myself. I didn't know what I wanted. I had to identify what it was that I wanted, and that required a trust of myself in a way. I had been in a relationship, the same relationship, since I was 21 years old. And so I really didn't know what it was that I wanted, not as a single guy moving through the world. And so I had to learn how to tolerate a great deal of uncertainty. The uncertainty felt like, oh, the other shoe is about to drop, and I'm not exactly sure where, but it's probably not going to be in my favor. And I needed a good deal of encouragement from people who know me and who love me, who were able to say, go and see what's there. Go and see what's there. And I am a risk taker. I've always been a risk taker. And so I was able to take some pretty big risks for myself. I went and spent a month in Paris.
Wow.
It had been a long time. My wife had been ill for quite a while, and I had not traveled. And I thought, why don't you go to France? You've always wanted to go to Paris. And the night before I left, I thought, Jack, you have absolutely lost your mind, easy as you can be. And I thought, what's the worst that can happen? You don't like it, you get on an airplane, you come home. And so finding ways to reassure myself, which is different from finding the reassurance from others. Most of us who have been in a relationship and find that then we are solo agers know how to solicit the reassurance from others. We don't know as much how to do that for ourselves, particularly at 3 o'clock in the morning When you wake up worried,
That's when we do our best thinking.
that's when we do our best and when we do our worst. Think you get all of that in the dark, in the evening, and unless you can then find some way to plug in to the good, the bad, and the ugly, and rely on that to give some energy to how you're going to proceed, then you're going to be stuck.
Just drawing from your own experience, which I appreciate you sharing. The night before, you may have had some doubts, but it sounds like you still packed and still got on the airplane. Even with all of the doubts, perhaps you packed those as well or chose to leave them behind and then spent a month in Paris, which just sounds like an incredible experience and a whole and a different conversation for another time. But that is fantastic. And I think can really uh, inform, impact others who might be listening or watching this. When you think about men navigating solo aging, do you think that there are particular pitfalls that people may find themselves wrestling with as they're aging on their own?
You have touched on one. So many times men look there to be an automatic network and want to have things put in place without the feeding and watering of the relationship that takes a period of time to do. I know one fellow who came to see me who his problem that he presented was that he couldn't find anyone who was willing to be his proxy for his advance directives. And I said, who was in your network? He said, I have no friends. He said, maybe there's a distant cousin. And the issue then was, how are you going to create a circle of intimates, people who are sufficiently close that they are willing to speak up, to give voice to your wishes, because there's some energy there, not just because it's a functional task. If you need to do it as a functional task, I asked him why he didn't go and hire a lawyer. And he said, I want somebody personal. And I said, then that's where you've got some work to do, and it's going to take a while. You have to be the one to call, to invite, to send birthday cards, to remember holiday. The energy goes this way. And then over the course of time, you will see the energy that comes back. And those that are more mutual with you, you can develop a friendship. You can develop a sense of camaraderie. If you only give and nothing comes back, you thank those people for their time and you move on.
Are there first steps you recommend? And for everyone, recognizing that for everyone it's different, right? Personality types, experiences.
Yeah, but there are some generalities. I do believe that the easiest step is to find a group, a small group that is identified by your best interest. If you find something that you like, it could be in the South, Sunday school groups. There is at the local museum here, there is an old movie group, Psycho, some Alfred, obviously the Alfred Hitchcock series is going now, and you go, screw your courage to the sticking point, as Shakespeare said, walk in, watch the movie, and then have a conversation afterwards and stick around. That's the place to start, is to see how much you can tolerate being on your own in the context of a smaller group. I'm not big at all. This is another pitfall. for folks of my age and stage of
Mhm.
life doing dating apps.
Mm.
I think they're a disaster. I don't know any client nor any peer who has found any type of connection on a dating app. I'm not big on social media as it is.
Mhm.
And so folks go, this is how you meet people. Just not.
3D experience is a nice experience. The ability to
Well,
sit
the
in a room with
3D
other people.
experience, the skin to skin, the face to face,
Right.
there's a warmth, there's an energy, there's a sense of exchange that you cannot get. These dating apps, they'll give you a billboard. And for most of us, there's not a good language. I think the term long-term relationship
Mm.
is just wrong. I don't think that most of us who are solo agers, we may be looking for companionship. We may be looking for more of a sense of intimacy, or folks to be looking to involve themselves in another primary relationship.
Mm.
And I don't think that there's a term now for what folks of my generation want. Of dating somehow feels a bit immature,
Mm.
relationship feels a little contrived,
Right.
doesn't fit. Same time, when you are of my age and stage of life, there is some sense that we are all have been sexually active, an erotic component to it, independent. And so you get dating, you don't need to start talking about who's paying and who's not. And there are just any number of problems with the establishment of a primary relationship.
Mhm. That definitely would go in the pitfall category. The whole component of solely connecting with peers, one of the things that I suggest to people as they're building their support networks with intentionality, right? We know that's a major component when it comes to solo aging planning, is the whole thing of having age diversity, if that's a possibility. And to an extent, and everyone
Yeah,
has
I
a different
agree. I will tell
approach.
you, I'll let you finish and then I'll tell you what I just nodded my head to.
So everyone has a different approach, but the going to see a movie and talking about it, the going to a photography class because you're interested in photography brings you into the room in a different way. You may still find yourself in a room of peers, but brings you into it with that affinity for the something, which might create unexpected connections that you can greatly benefit and they can benefit from their connection with you as well. I did bring a smile to your face, and I'd love to know what the inner workings are of all of that.
I'm going in two directions.
Uh huh.
Let me tell you the first direction because what you just said is lovely. An unexpected connection. I do believe that when we are ready to be connected to others, that moving in the world is going to take us to those places that our unconscious energy bubbles to the surface, and so that we can find those unconscious connections.
Mm.
So that's one piece about age related. I have a very good friend in Western North Carolina who has helped me to create what I call a friends and relatives circle. Now, I don't have relatives. I am the very end of my generation. And so I'm it. I don't children. I don't have. So but I needed a vowel to
Huh?
end. There are several of us of the same gender. We are all men. What we have done is given each other all of our vital information, license numbers, keys to our house, uh, all sorts of insurance information. Is when one of us needs help, instrumental aid. I had cataract surgery recently, and was asked, you have to go for cataract surgery. You
Right.
have to take somebody with you.
Mhm.
They will not do surgery unless you
No.
have somebody with you
Right.
and who is there. And
Right.
so I asked one of my peeps, one of my boys, I said, will you go with me? He said, of course I will. And so we went. And so I signed in. The question was, as he was standing right behind me, who are you? He said, we told him his name. They said, now, are you his husband? And he just started laughing, and he said, close enough.
Right.
And sat there. I got the surgery. He took
Mhm.
him, he dropped me off and was gone.
Uh-huh.
Those types of connections in my friends and relative circle, my friend who organized her circle in Western North Carolina was very clear. She said it needs to be gender specific. She
Interesting.
said, if I'm sick, I don't want to have to get dressed for you to look better for you. And there is a social thing. She said, you're going to want the guys who are going to be around you who don't care if they've seen you in your underwear or not.
Mm.
So we are of the same generation. We about a 10-year window with each other and are very careful to ensure that we've got the capacity to provide instrumental aid to each other.
That's a fantastic example. I like the FAR group. I work with folks who have created kinship groups, support circles, and work with people on mapping out
Yeah.
who currently is a part of your support system using a model that was created actually by a solo ager in Canada. And that circle, you put me in the middle, and then your first circle is that of intimacy, whoever closest to you. Your next circle outside of that is friendship. And so that those folks could go in and out of, so intimacy being those closest to you. It doesn't have to be a romantic partner of any kind. And then the next circle out is that of participation, that movie group, that book club, that church group, synagogue group, etc. And then the farthest circle is exchange, which is purchase services. And that can be hair salons, car mechanics, etc. But mapping that out on a paper, whatever style works for you, when people say, I don't feel I have connections, gives people an opportunity perhaps to enhance connections first by seeing it on their own map. And so you can look at who winds up in those circles and where there might be an opportunity for growth or enhancement. I think the FAR concept is fantastic. Like I said, I have heard kinship groups, support circles, accountability groups. Do people ever mention accountability groups, which are slightly different?
I don't know that term. I do think what you say has such wisdom, and that's documenting. I invite clients to put themselves at the center and then draw those circles and put your intimates, your close friends, that next level, and the next level. There is a fair amount of social science research. If a man has one friend, he's ahead of the game, a really good friend.
Right.
And I really encourage the men that I work with that they need two or three, that they can pick up the phone and call and say, can you help me with? And it's something that is related to a vulnerability, which most of us men will translate then into a frailty or a fragility. I don't know how to do this. Can you help me do it?
Right.
That's not fragile, and it doesn't make me less capable. It does make me less capable, but it gives me an opportunity to say, help, would you do this? In my circle,
Uh-huh.
has been out of the country, and he his primary caregiver for his elderly mother. And he said, would you watch out after her? And I said, of course I will. And
Right.
so I have been 2 or 3 times to visit her and make sure that she's covered and that she's okay. And so that has given us an opportunity for he and I to move in closer relationship
Mm.
together.
I also think that demonstrates the I'm seeking help also can demonstrate I'm available to help someone else.
And I think that has to be stated explicitly. I think that when I ask for help, I have to be very willing to be helpful. That we are living in a world right now that doesn't understand much of a sense of common good and much of a sense of mutuality.
Mm.
And that's something that we are having to relearn and re-experience.
I agree. I think that navigating those things, I also remind people who might be hesitant about asking for help that volunteering in some capacity, one, it leads to more connections potentially, and two, and it's a really good human thing to do. So that's the most important part. But it also gives you an initial step to trying out making new connections before you yourself might need help. And so it can be a key piece of that. In terms of the other pieces, do folks ever recognize the third places that they navigate? Or is that too in the weeds when someone is just first trying to figure out how do I make an initial connection?
Now, you'll have to help me out. The third places they navigate, I'm not sure I understand.
So the whole social construct, sociological construct of first place being our home where we have our most intimate of connections. The second place being work, or I like to, for people who might have retired, throw in maybe a consistent volunteering job group they participate in. Those are two places often in other models of our society, pre-pandemic, pre-remote, pre all of those things, where people tended to make their most consistent connections. And the sociological concept is then there are all of these other places, which are referred to as third places that we interact with on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual routine. And we don't even give thought to it in terms of, oh, maybe there are connections to enhance in this. The same person I see walking their dog, right? The person I say hi to, the person I see in a coffee shop, the person I see at a book club or some other group oriented. Those are all places that I interact with and others interact with that too. And perhaps there are opportunities for enhanced connections. Again, not instantly, it takes work, but perhaps those are opportunities to expand those circles you referred to in terms of all of that mapping out.
I do believe that every opportunity is the possibility to enhance. My friends laugh at me. They say, do you know somebody everywhere you go? And I say, of course I do. And if I don't, I'm disappointed and I'm going to introduce myself. And so there is great value to extend yourself with one extra sentence. How are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. How's your day going? To make two extra sentences gives an opportunity to enhance some type of a verbal connection that may give you a moment of contact. And
Mm-hmm.
internally, that moment of contact then is going to advise you if this is something that you would like to pursue a bit further. I also believe that if there is any one attribute that we have psychologically that is going to be healing. It's altruism.
Mm.
If you're in a bad mood, do something for someone else and you will be better. There's psychological benefit to extending yourself, and then there's sociological benefit to being able to offer your sense of who you are without judgment on behalf of another. Yeah, it's really interesting living in the big city because there are any number of clearinghouses of where you can volunteer. People say, I don't know where to go. I've got a list here,
Mhm.
pick this, and then you will be invited. Some people want one client that I know is now rocking babies every Thursday at the
Oh,
local hospital. Another client says, I don't want to do that every Thursday, but I can volunteer for events. They go to the Carter Center and
mhm.
hold the door for people who come to read. And so there are any number of ways to experiment with that sense of then talk a little bit more.
Right.
Just take one more step. I encourage some folks who say, I'm too much of an introvert, is get 5 sentences, 5 questions
Right.
that are generic questions. Ask this. Folks will go look at me and they go, are you serious? It's like, as a
Yes.
judge, this is something that is familiar. I'm not comfortable with that. Nobody said you would be. Do it anyway. If you do indeed practice, you will gain comfort and you will gain information about how people then move either toward you or away from you.
Do people carry that out and then come back and say, wow, that really surprised me. I was surprised by X, Y, and Z. Does that
Some
ever
do,
happen?
some don't. Some are more resistant. And if an individual is resistant, then I'm curious about what the need for protection is. Being connected to others really does require opening to more of a sense of vulnerability. There are days that we all have that we would rather stay under the bed.
Right.
And so, if that happens with any degree of regularity, then it's worth talking about.
Right.
That there may be more of a risk involved than is immediately evident.
We know that connection is key to health outcomes, right? We can't change
Oh,
the
yeah.
medical and all of that, but those connections affect people's health outcomes, affect how people are medication adherent or not, feel a greater sense of connection to the outside world, feel a part of something. And even when people identify as an introvert, what is a one thing they can do? And so I think you've given people a lot of different things to think about. Do clients come to you now that you've done some deep diving into the subject? You've written a number of articles as well. Do clients specifically come to you with the navigating solo aging piece, or it's a byproduct?
No, I am seeing now with some frequency people who describe themselves as being lonely and being stuck in their isolation
Hmm.
and are looking to find ways to be better connected. And so it is much more of a practice style as I am working toward retirement,
Mm.
which means working less. I tend to see people who are older. I'm an old guy, so they want somebody with a little snow on their roof. Uh, and so the issues are fairly resonant.
We've really explored the subject. I'm sure there's much more that we could discuss as well, but I thought we'd change things up a little bit and give people an opportunity to additionally get to know you on a more personal level. So,
Mm-hmm.
if there were a skill or talent you could instantly master, what would
Oh
it
my
be and
gosh.
why?
In a New York minute, I would be able to sing beautifully. Undergraduate degree is in music from many years ago, and I really had this dream to be Mick Jagger. I was not thin, and I really didn't have the tenacity to stick with it, but I have always wanted to be able to sing beautifully. And I can carry a tune in a bucket, but it's not a very pretty bucket.
If you are inching towards retirement, as you've shared, perhaps there are opportunities to further that and take lessons or join a group or anything like that.
There are any number of choirs for bad singers, and so
They stand in the back. I think that's fantastic. And after the music paths, was it a direct path to exploring and getting a PhD in psychology, or did you have other stops along the way?
I was making my living as a musician here in Atlanta and was hired as a music therapist at a local mental health institution and found that I had an appetite and a capacity to work with people who were severely mentally ill,
Mm.
really liked the work. And that led me into more of a sense of what I could do as a psychologist rather than as a musician. And so it was one of those hard right turns that
Mhm.
in my life that has been fairly characteristic. I think that's probably what will be on my tombstone is it's Jack Rayner made hard right turns. I just hope it's a hard right turn into heaven and not hell. Will Hunt.
I think you're headed in the right direction with that as well. I also think that's a beautiful blend of two passions, and the discovery of those passions are fantastic and have led you right turns and all to where it sounds like you're exactly where you should be in a lot of ways. Is there any specific piece of advice that you've received along the way on any of those paths that you really feel that have stuck with you over the years?
There are always those good paternal teachers, the voices that come back to you. And I always, when I'm going off into a direction that feels unfamiliar or that feels a little less well known, I recall my senior high school English teacher who read to us, he read Hamlet to
Wow.
us. And there is a particular section where Polonius gives advice to Laertes, an older gives advice to a younger, and he says, to thine own self be true, then that
Mm.
counts not be false to any other. When I get into some of that territory that feels sociologically or environmentally unfamiliar, to see how congruent it is with how I know myself. And that gives me a benchmark.
You've offered so many personal and professional insights and expertise that is going to really benefit people who are listening or watching. Is there, before we wrap up, is there anything that you feel you'd like to add? I'm going to mention your website and all of that as we wrap up, but is there anything you feel we skipped over or you'd really like to make sure is a part of this conversation?
I'm good with this. There's always more. And so I really do believe that any conversation similar to what we're having, if it's mutual, if it's genuine, if it's authentic, it's going to take us into new places. And so I'm sure at 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will wake up and I will go, doggone it, I wish I had, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a good thing. And
Right.
so I hope that if folks are watching, listening, and feel any degree of curiosity about where this takes them, good for them.
Fantastic. It's really been a pleasure to have this conversation and to benefit from your insight and wisdom and expertise and time. So I greatly appreciate that. And I know our listeners do too. For anyone who would like to find out more information about you and your work, your website is drjacksonraynor.com, right?
That's
And
right.
we will make sure that's also posted in the show notes so someone can just click off of that as well. So, as we wrap up, thank you for tuning into the Navigating Solo podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you have any questions or topics to suggest or individuals to have as a guest, please email us at podcast@navigatingsolo.com. Until next time, stay empowered and connected. I'm your host, Ailene Gerhardt, and this is the Navigating Solo podcast.